entitled the sermon today, Rich Towards God, because this is a statement that Jesus makes. And so our question for us today is, how is it that we can be rich toward God, and are we rich towards God, and what does all that look like? And Jesus gives us an incredible example that he sets up this question about being rich toward God in the book of Luke. And so we're going to look at Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. And you'll have to kind of forgive me and extend the grace of God, because there's other scriptures around this, because I can't give you the full package, but I want you to understand a little bit about how that looks. So we'll have some other scriptures in there. If we don't get to all of them, at least you have them in your notes. But let's read from the book of Luke this parable. And Jesus calls it, well, it's entitled here, the parable of the rich fool. And so someone in the crowd, verse 13, said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now, I'd like to ask a question. How many of you have ever been involved in an inheritance? Okay. Did it go well? Or the question that we're about to ask here, because I was listening to the song that Jeanette was singing. It talks about, heirs to his throne and all of that. And the question would be, as heirs, how good might we be as heirs? Would we be willing to share? Or will we be like these two brothers here, or whatever? I've got an inheritance and you got more than I got, and I want this to be shared. But Jesus replied, verse 14, "Man, who appointed me judge or an arbitrator between you?" Then he said, now, and this is his warning, "Watch out, because be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist of the abundance of his possessions." And then he told them a parable. So he's trying to help them to understand how this might look in this parable. "The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop, and he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops.' And then he said, 'This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store again all my grain and my goods. And I will say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him," and this is what God is saying, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Who then will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich towards God." Now, let me give you a little preemptive statement here, a little addendum to this. This is not a sermon about tithing. This is not a sermon about giving money. But it is a sermon about being rich toward God. And I hope that we can understand that and how God would have us to look at these things. Because Jesus made this statement and gave this parable, it therefore, I think in all of our minds and thinking, it should be important. Because anything that Jesus tells us and gives us some examples of in our lives should be very important. We listen to him. Now, this isn't the only time that Jesus makes this kind of statement. We find over in the book of Matthew, chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16. So it isn't, again, I'm going to Matthew 16 just to remind us it isn't a one-time statement, but rather it is an overarching theme that you find in the preaching of Jesus. But Matthew chapter 16 and verse 21. It says, "From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life." Now, this is at the hands of all the, quote, authorities, the chief priests, all of that we find here. So now, his beloved disciple, Peter, does what most disciples would do, and I think what we would want done too. We don't want people to suffer. We don't want them to go through difficulties. But Jesus kind of gave the whole story. He's got to suffer all that and then be raised the third day. So Peter says to him, he took him aside and he began to rebuke him. And now just imagine that. taking Jesus aside and rebuking him. But I'm going to ask the question, how often have we done that? We have taken God aside and kind of rebuked him for doing what he is doing. How often do we hear people say, for example, well, if our God, I wouldn't do it this way? Well, that's kind of a rebuke in God's face, that we have a better way of doing things. So he began to rebuke him. He said, never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. Now, as parents, how many times have we rescued our children from situations because we don't want them to be in any kind of pain or problem? And we don't really discuss the whole story, have a greater understanding. Well, let's get real. We must understand, I think that we do understand, that people, they grow up and we make decisions, we make choices, and there are consequences. And as parents, we never stop loving them. Even though they may mess up their lives big time, you never stop loving them, as God never stops loving us. That's a little different approach than as human beings. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get you behind me, Satan. Now, I'm suggesting that what Jesus is telling us here is this is Satan's way of doing things. It is he who is prompting this thought, this action, this behavior on your part. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have the mind of the things of God, but of the things of men. This is a different way of thinking. You're thinking like men think, and it seems reasonable to you, but this is how God thinks, and you don't have that mind. And he reminds him of that. And then he goes on, he says, then Jesus said to the disciples, if anyone will come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it. And whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? So Jesus is giving a contrast here that you can have many things. In fact, he uses the point of gaining the whole world. You're the tops of Forbes' list. You're the wealthiest man in the world. You got everything you want. Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward them, each person according to what he has done. Quite an admonition. And so we see here that there are things for us to learn. And there are things that we can understand. Now, interesting in this is followed in the book of Matthew, with Jesus tells them this, and then following that you read about the transfiguration, where Jesus talked about the glory and all of that, and then after that you have the transfiguration where they see Jesus rise, and he's there, he's glorified, and the voice from heaven comes and says, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, listen to him. So, when we think about saving our lives by losing them, it is for what reason? It is for Jesus' sake that we do that. It is not just for our sake that we're trying to do this. It is for the sake of our Lord. We are doing things for him, which I believe make us rich towards God. It makes us rich towards God because we love his Son. Now, you think about as the God the Father loves his Son, we love his Son as well. And we do it for his sake. And how often in our life do we do things for other people's sake? Any parent knows that. It is for the sake of others. And this is also outside of ourselves.
Feeling the blues today or tired of life already? Do you have questions about life or need spiritual advice? We can help. Log on to worldwidechurchofgod.com or wcgfairfield.blogspot.com and stay connected to reality. The Worldwide Church of God in Fairfield, Santa Rosa, and Modesto are located in the San Francisco Bay Area, regarded as the most prosperous region in the United States. We believe Jesus Christ when he proclaimed in Matthew 6:24 that serving God is more important than serving mammon. We welcome everyone to come and worship and fellowship every Saturday at the times listed on your screen and on our website, worldwidechurchofgod.com.